Hi, this is Phil Shapiro in Tacoma Park, Maryland. I finished reading a really interesting and wonderful book. Beyond Trans, Does Gender Matter? So, some books that are written, they help you become a better human being when you read the book. And I was just 1 or 2 pages into reading this book when I realized that this is the kind of book that makes you a better human being by reading it, because it teaches you to be thinking more expansively and more empathetically about the world. And that's something that we should all be striving to do, is to try to think expansively and empathetically about the world. So this book is written by Heath Fogg Davis, and an associate professor of political science at Temple University in Philadelphia, an appointed member of Philadelphia's Mayoral Commission on LGBT Affairs. He is also the author of the book, The Ethics of Transracial Adoption, which I have got to track down. It's likely a really excellent book. I was so impressed by this book. So let's take a look. I have pulled out some quotes, and I also scanned the inside flap. I scanned some of this inside flap and the back page here just to share with you. Here we go. Let's take a peek here. So here's Heath Fogg Davis. Thank you. I'd like to thank the author. I'd like to thank the publisher, New York University Press. And I'd like to thank the friends and family of the author for encouraging him to write this book. And here's a quote that I pulled out of the book that will maybe be a motivation for you to read this book. The unemployment rate for transgender people is double that for non-transgender people. Transgender people of color experience a rate of unemployment 4 times the national rate. When the intersecting factors of race and class and direction of sex identity, i.e. male to female or female to male, are taken into account, the statistical picture of transgender discrimination and violence becomes even grimmer. The statistical picture for transgender women of color is especially dire. So you read that paragraph and you say, you know what? Maybe this isn't such a good thing. Maybe we need to be rethinking policies and practices in our society so that we can move beyond these statistics. So in the opening chapter of the book, there's a really interesting anecdotes about SEPTA. So that's the public transit in, I guess, the buses and maybe also the trains over in Philadelphia. And if you wanted to have like a monthly pass, they had a policy that you had to designate your sex identity for that monthly pass. And therefore, bus drivers could deny you access to your transportation if the bus driver made a decision without any specific training about your identity. So here's a story. Charlene Arcilla, an African-American transgender woman who lived and died in the city, was no stranger to grit. For her, it was another day of dealing with snickers and sneers of the people she passed on sidewalks and interacted with in stores and restaurants. On top of all that, there were the sex stickers. She swiped her monthly public transit pass marked with an F to signify a female sex sticker and braced what she might for what might come. She hoped she could quietly find a seat and ride to where she needs to go. That today would be one of the good days in the city of brotherly love. It was not. Arcilla tells her story in a weary voice. The driver was like, "You cannot use this pass," after I had swiped it, and I was walking to my seat. He called me back to the front and said, "Well, why can't I?" He said, "Because you are not female." And I was like, "Well, I'm a transsexual." And he said, "What's that?" And I'm like, okay, I do not feel like educating this man right now. I just want to get to my destination. So I pulled out $2 and I put the $2 into the meter. On a subsequent bus trip, Arcilla tried to use an M for male transit pass. It too was rejected, this time on the driver's pronouncement that she was not a male. You're beginning to see the picture, right? So this is a book, about dignity and humiliation, and about a society that just does not value dignity enough. And it asks the question, what can we do to counteract that? And then it explains here, from 1981 to July 2013, SEPTA mandated that all of its monthly transit passes bear a male or female sticker that match the sex identity of the purchaser and user. SEPTA's employee handbook instructed bus operators to verify each monthly pass for the correct date and the correct sex marker. But the handbook gave no guidance about criteria that bus drivers should use to verify the sex of drivers, and they carried out their many other duties. Consequently, individual bus operators were free to use their own subjective sex identity judgments to determine which pass holders could access the bus under their control. So the bus driver is hired to drive the bus, and all of a sudden they're doing another job that they're not trained for and causes humiliation. Well, SEPTA put an end to that policy, but not, I think there was a whole bunch of lawsuits. So this is from the inside back flap. Beyond Trans pushes the conversation on gender identity to its limits, questioning the need for gender categories in the first place, whether on a birth certificate or college admissions application or bathroom doors. Why do we need to mark people and places with sex categories? Do they serve a real purpose? Or do these places and forms just become measures and mechanisms of exclusion? Heath Fogg Davis offers an impassioned call to rethink the usefulness of dividing the world into not just male and female categories, but further questioning whether a category for transgender and gender fluid people would be any different. Why not just abolish these sex markers in the first place? Davis, himself a transgender man, explores the underlying gender-enforcing policies and customs in American life that have led to transgender bathroom bills, college admission controversies, and more, arguing that it is necessary for our society to take real steps to move past these gender identity classifications. This important book examines 4 areas where we need to rethink our sex classification systems: sex-marked identity documents such as birth certificates, driver's licenses, and passports, sex-segregated public restrooms and locker rooms, single-sex colleges, and sex-segregated sports. Speaking compellingly from his own experience and drawing upon major cases of sex discrimination in the news and in the courts, Davis presents a persuasive case for challenging how individuals are classified according to sex and offers concrete recommendations for alleviating sex identity discrimination and sex-based disadvantage. And now, this is from the back of the book, the back cover of the book. These are some of the testimonials. I felt compelled that I had to include some of these in the review. Why and when is it important to say whether someone is a man or woman? Those are the provocative questions Heath Fogg Davis poses in this informative exploration of gender markers. But even more provocative are the questions of how we determine what counts as man and woman in the first place, and why we imagine there can be only 2 genders. This is a great book for students and specialists alike who are interested in the profound transformation of genders we are all experiencing in the early 21st century. Susan Stricker, I think it's pronounced Stricker or Strecker, co-editor of TSQ, Transgender Studies Quarterly, and author of Transgender History. Both clear-eyed and eye-opening, Beyond Trans challenges all of us, gender non-conforming and cisgender, trans and gender-conforming individuals and organizations, to ask ourselves why and how we are using sex classifications, what harm they might be doing, and just how they're even defining sex. A provocative and compelling book. That's Joshua Gamson, author of Modern Families, Stories of Extraordinary Journeys of Kinship. In this important and original book, Davis argues that most bureaucracies should get out of the business of administering sex by classifying people as female or male. Drawing a number of case studies, including identity documents, bathroom bills, college admissions, sex-based testing for athletes, Davis shows most policies for sex classification are not rationally related to legitimate government interests. Especially when you consider the degree of the humiliation that individuals encounter, it just doesn't add up. Drawing on a range of literatures and methods, including critical race scholarship, feminist theory, autoethnography, and doctrinal legal analysis, Beyond Trans is applied political theory at its best. Paisley Curra, co-editor, TSQ, Transgender Studies Quarterly. In a lively and accessible style, Davis questions the administrative and social practice of labeling individual sex or gender solely in correspondence with the binary categories of female and male. He challenges the validity of sex-identifying documents and sex-segregated facilities, even competitive sports, as solutions to privacy, safety, or equality. This is a thought-provoking, highly relevant subject, perfect for today's political and cultural debates. Jameson Green, author of Becoming a Visible Man. For activists and practitioners in search of pragmatic ways to make our world more inclusive of diverse, intersectional sex identity and transgender and gender nonconforming people in particular, Davis's recommendations provide much-needed practical solutions to help work through this complex issue. A provocative call to action, Beyond Trans pushes us to think about how we work to make America truly inclusive to all citizens. And then, this is page 17 of the book. So this is the author himself explaining about the purpose of the book. It's called The Argument. I believe that all of us would be better off in a society with dramatically fewer sex classification policies. And I argue that the basic structure of anti-discrimination law can help us make this happen. But the kind of legalism I have in mind is not adversarial. Lawsuits and the threat of lawsuits are sometimes needed in order to force people and organizations to do what they otherwise are unwilling to do. But I also believe that anti-discrimination laws can be used to inspire and bring about positive institutional change before conflict arises and the lawyers are called in. In a series of 4 case studies, I show why it is in the best interest of organizations of all kinds to minimize the administration of sex. When sex classification is relevant, and sometimes it is also in their best interest to redesign such policies so that the harm of sex identity discrimination is minimized. Well, that sounds like a good idea to me. So I have my own brief anecdote on this. I work at a public library. About 5 years ago, a very talented middle school student came to me, a student that I'm mentoring, and she said, I'm entering an essay contest. And in my essay contest, I'm supposed to write, what issues would Martin Luther King Jr. be working on today if he were alive? So I thought about it a bit, and my answer was, I thought Martin Luther King Jr., the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., would be working on marriage equality. Now, as I look back on my answer a few years later, I can see how that answer was incorrect. It was too limiting. I should have said Martin Luther King Jr. would be working on issues of human dignity in their largest sense, which includes marriage equality, transgender rights, and all other issues of dignity, including modern slavery and all the other ills that befall our world today. So my answer was incomplete. And this book now has helped me understand that I gave an incomplete answer to a student that I was mentoring. But now that I've read this book, I'm a better person for it. So I need to thank the author. I want to thank the publisher and everybody else who helped make this book happen. I need to ask anybody looking at this review, what's your role? Maybe you should check to make sure that your public library has a copy of this book. Just ask them to buy it. Ask them to buy this book. I'm also thinking about this thing today. So this is the summer of 2017, and Congress is just about to go on recess. I'm wondering what books members of Congress read when they go on recess. I sure hope they read some books. When you're on recess, it's a time to go back to your state and talk with constituents, but I hope you spend some of the time reading. you can't have a better country unless you yourself become a better human being. And the way you become a better human being is to read good books. So I hope some members of Congress and other elected officials in all branches of government read this book. And maybe even discuss it with family and friends. And see if this book illuminates your mind. It might. I found it did. And I really hope that we expect more of our elected representatives. People need to be reading more, honestly. If I work at a library, but if people read more, I think they might understand the world more, and that might be a good thing. If people understood the world more, that might be a good thing. I should mention at the end of this book there is a very good appendix called The Gender Audit, a how-to guide for organizations. Very practical. And this glossary. The glossary helps individuals use words that are less demeaning. Now, wouldn't that be good? Wouldn't that be good if people who work in libraries and schools and hospitals, how about if they use words that were less demeaning? That'd be good, wouldn't it? So thank you, Heath Fogg Davis. This is an excellent book. I'm going to go read your other book too. The other book, for those it's called The Ethics of Transracial Adoption. So thank you. Here's the book, Beyond Trans. And here's my info. You can follow me on Twitter if you want to see my next book reviews and my metaphor jokes. And this over here is on the screen that's my Google site where I've done about 50 book reviews, mostly in video form, in the past 10 years. Trying to do my bit to shed a little bit of light onto knowledge and books worth reading. So, bye. This is Phil Shapiro.